At 4:26 a.m., the Caribbean sky did something no radar officer aboard a U.S. Navy destroyer had seen in years. It flashed without a sound, as if the horizon itself had been cut open. For a split second, the ops center thought it was a sensor fault. It was not. A Russian Yasen-class nuclear attack submarine had surfaced for only moments inside Venezuelan territorial waters, its dark silhouette framed by the faint orange glow of Puerto Cabello's newly restricted naval zone, an area that was never marked restricted until very recently. For the first time since the Cold War, Moscow was not whispering near America's borders. It was announcing itself with steel. And behind that single, silent flash lay a question that sent analysts scrambling across Washington. What changed behind closed doors in Caracas that allowed Russia to push this far, this fast, this boldly? Because no submarine surfaces there by accident. No nation redraws a naval zone without intention. And no superpower marches into America's backyard unless something much larger is in motion. This is the hidden strategy now unfolding beneath the waves, one that neither Washington nor Beijing expected to ignite on the same morning. Stay with this story, because what happens 10 minutes after this flash will rewrite everything you think you know about power in the Caribbean. At first, Washington treated Venezuela's port access deal with Russia as little more than political theater, another bold announcement from Caracas that would fade with time. But 72 hours later, that assumption unraveled. Fresh satellite imagery revealed a second Russian submarine, a diesel-electric kilo armed with long-range caliber missiles, positioned beside a Venezuelan frigate while fast patrol boats moved in disciplined formation around them. This was not a courtesy visit. It was a coordinated deployment arranged with quiet precision. What disturbed analysts was not the arrival itself, but the absolute silence surrounding it. No statements, no diplomatic signaling, no leaks, only a cold, deliberate absence of information. In strategy, silence is rarely accidental. It is a form of intent. And that intent forced a far more unsettling question. If Russia could maneuver freely only 900 nautical miles from Miami, what would prevent China from executing a similar test near Guam, inside the very radar blind arcs that American planners have warned about for years? The Caribbean suddenly looked less like a regional flashpoint and more like a rehearsal for something larger. Because adversaries do not always coordinate openly. Sometimes they simply move in ways that complement each other. Pressure in one theater creates distraction in another, and if Russia's advance into America's backyard was not an isolated gesture, but one part of a broader pattern, then Washington might already be responding to the wrong signal. The next development arrived before dawn, and it would push the USS Carney into the most delicate and dangerous position a U.S. destroyer had faced in the Caribbean in decades. At 5:15 a.m., inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Carney, a faint low-frequency contact appeared too steady for debris, too deliberate for a civilian vessel. The sonar technician froze as the signature clarified. A Russian submarine was operating less than 40 nautical miles off Venezuela's coast. The detection alone was troubling, but what followed in the next minutes shifted the situation from unusual to unprecedented. By 5:22 a.m., a Venezuelan helicopter lifted off from La Orchila Island and flew a tight circular pattern directly above the suspected Russian position. This was not search and rescue behavior. It was a shield, an intentional aerial curtain designed to mask Russian underwater movements from U.S. surveillance. For the first time, Venezuelan forces were not merely hosting Russia. They were actively protecting its operation. At 5:31 a.m., the USS Carney adjusted course by 3 degrees starboard, small enough to escape most satellite tracking systems, but symbolically enormous. The destroyer was repositioning to maintain pressure without risking a collision of intent that could ignite an international incident. Every officer understood that misjudging even a single turn could transform Pacific tension into Caribbean chaos in minutes. Meanwhile, inside Puerto Cabello's restricted naval zone, port cameras recorded cranes lifting ammunition containers stamped with Cyrillic markings. Analysts later concluded these were housings for missile guidance modules, equipment only transported when a naval group is preparing for sustained operations. Nothing about this resembled a ceremonial port call. It was the early architecture of a forward operating posture. Below the surface, the Yasen-class submarine executed a silent repositioning maneuver, adjusting its arc to establish area denial across the sea lanes the United States Navy routinely patrols. If conflict erupted, any American carrier transiting the Caribbean would instantly enter the Yasen's kill envelope. Then, at 5:53 a.m., a peculiar radar echo appeared on the Carney's display, a slow-moving object at medium altitude, hovering just outside Venezuelan airspace. Likely an Orlan series drone, it was conducting real-time surveillance of every movement the destroyer made, every turn, every radio burst, every formation shift. But the most alarming moment arrived at 5:58 a.m. when the Russian Kilo-class submarine transmitted a tight beam encrypted signal toward the Venezuelan coastline. The contents remain unknown, but analysts believe it initiated a data-sharing link between Russian sonar and Venezuelan coastal radar, an integrated maritime picture that placed every U.S. Navy vessel within 100 nautical miles under a joint monitoring system. For Washington, this was the nightmare scenario. A Russia-Venezuela surveillance network forming quietly, only hours away from U.S. shores. And if that network carried a secondary purpose, providing early warning or strategic signaling for China in the Pacific, then the global balance of power had just shifted before sunrise. As the first light touched the Caribbean, one question dominated every Pentagon briefing. Was this simply a localized partnership playing out at sea, or the opening move in a larger, synchronized strategy no one had fully recognized yet? By 6:23 a.m., the first sweep of sunlight revealed a tableau no American commander wanted to confront. Two Venezuelan patrol ships holding a firm blocking line between the USS Carney and the open water sector where the Russian submarines were operating. It was not an attack, but it was unmistakably a challenge, a deliberate test of resolve executed with calculated timing. Only minutes later, at 6:29 a.m., the Carney's radar registered another anomaly. A Venezuelan Lupo-class frigate, accelerating from port at 27 knots, was cutting directly toward the corridor traditionally used by U.S. Navy destroyers. Never before had Caracas performed a maneuver this bold, this synchronized, or this clearly aligned with Russian underwater movements. Yet on the surface, it still maintained the thin veneer of routine naval activity. The facade dissolved 10 minutes later when a coded frequency hopping flash appeared across the Carney's long-range radar, an encrypted signal bouncing between Venezuelan coastal stations and a Russian electronic warfare suite aboard the Kilo submarine. This was not ordinary communication. It was a data handshake, the first step toward fusing two surveillance systems into one real-time maritime picture. If successful, Moscow would gain near-continuous visibility inside the Caribbean basin, while Caracas would receive Russian-grade targeting fidelity. In a conflict simulation, this effectively created a forward sensor line only hours from American shores. At 6:41 a.m., the USS Carney activated its passive missile defense array, not as a threat, but as a warning that the U.S. Navy was transitioning into heightened awareness mode. The ship's AN, divided by SPY, one radar began sweeping broad arcs across the sea, and within seconds, it detected something else. A second Russian drone, larger and flying with a measured, deliberate steadiness, trailing the Carney at 14 nautical miles. Not close enough for harassment, but exactly close enough for systematic monitoring. It was the kind of shadowing operation designed to make a point Russia could track a U.S. destroyer continuously from the moment it entered the region until the moment it left. Inside the Combat Information Center, tension thickened as every officer understood the risk. A single misinterpreted radar ping, an overly aggressive course adjustment, even the wake from another ship could trigger a miscalculation with consequences far beyond the Caribbean. That risk materialized at 6:52 a.m. when the Venezuelan frigate angled 5 degrees closer to the Carney's course, an adjustment small on paper but catastrophic in practice. With only 2,000 yards between them, the margin for error collapsed. At that distance, a missile would need less than 5 seconds to close the gap, and even waves rolling off the hulls began interfering with maneuvering. The Carney's captain issued a ship-wide alert. Engines eased, rudders corrected. But the Venezuelan frigate continued forward without adjusting a single line of approach. Below them, in the sonar room, came another report that shifted the entire encounter into a new dimension. The Yasin-class submarine had repositioned itself directly beneath the point of surface tension, placing a Russian strike platform at the core of the developing standoff. This move was not symbolic, it was tactical. Moments later, analysts were forced to consider the possibilities no one wanted to confront. Was this a message, a trap, or the first phase of a coordinated Russia-Venezuela encirclement strategy? And more unsettling still, if Russia could carry out such a maneuver here inside America's own sphere, what prevented China from mirroring the same strategy in the Pacific next? The question that now loomed over the bridge in Washington was simple but perilous. If you were the U.S. commander aboard the Carney, with a frigate closing in above and a nuclear attack submarine maneuvering below, would you hold your line or force the Venezuelans to back away? At 7:14 a.m., the standoff crossed a threshold no one expected so early. Without warning, the Venezuelan frigate surged forward, driving its engines to nearly 30 knots and tightening the already razor-thin distance with the USS Kearney. It was a classic pressure boxing maneuver, forcing the opposing ship to yield or risk collision, and for a partner nation of Russia to attempt such a tactic against a U.S. Navy destroyer was not just bold, it was provocative in a way that carried unmistakable intent. 7 minutes later, the situation escalated again. At 7:21 a.m., the Kearney's electronic warfare suite detected a narrow-beam radar illumination sweep from the Venezuelan ship. It was not a full targeting lock, but it was the first step in the firing sequence. U.S. commanders trained to avoid at all costs. The sweep triggered an immediate surge of tension across every combat station, yet the Kearney held course. The message was deliberate. The United States would not be pushed out of international waters by a regional proxy acting under Moscow's umbrella. Meanwhile, underwater, the Russian presence tightened. The Yasen-class submarine began altering depth 70 meters, then 60, then 55. An unusually shallow posture for a nuclear attack submarine, and clearly intentional. By rising into the shallow band beneath the Kearney, it positioned itself for a potential vertical pincer, a move designed to challenge the destroyer from below should the surface confrontation spiral. At 7:33 a.m., the Russian Kilo submarine joined the geometry, shifting into a lateral flank position that boxed the Kearney on two underwater axes, two submarines tightening their formation, one Venezuelan frigate closing range, patrol craft armed and observing from the coastline, drones feeding Russia every movement of every hull and rotor. The alignment was too precise, too coordinated to dismiss as coincidence. It was a three-dimensional encirclement, an operation someone had choreographed with quiet, methodical precision. Then, at 7:38 a.m., satellite imagery revealed the most alarming development yet. Venezuelan naval crews began unloading cylindrical containers from a transport truck labeled Proyecto Especial. Russian advisors stood beside them, monitoring each movement. Later analysis confirmed these were launch modules compatible with the Caliber family of cruise missile systems capable of striking targets nearly 1,500 miles away. If deployed on Venezuelan soil, the entire southeastern United States, Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas would fall within reach of long-range precision weapons guided by Russian architecture. Inside the Pentagon, a classified alert appeared under a stark headline: Potential strategic checkmate in progress. If Russia established even a temporary missile presence in Venezuela, U.S., Homeland Security doctrine would change overnight. Strategic depth would collapse. Every aircraft carrier battle group departing Norfolk or Mayport would do so under a threat corridor monitored by Russian sensors and Venezuelan coastal tracking radars. And another, darker question circulated in hushed tones among senior admirals: was this buildup merely a localized confrontation, or was it Russia's opening move in a dual-front pressure strategy designed to complement China's tightening posture in the Pacific? If both adversaries escalated simultaneously, Russia in the Caribbean, China in the South China Sea, could Washington respond with equal strength on both fronts, or would one theater fracture first? At 7:44 a.m., a final message crackled across the Kearney's bridge: maintain course, do not yield. It was Washington drawing a line in the water. Yet the Venezuelan frigate showed no inclination to slow or alter direction. The geometry was tightening, the stakes were rising, and the next decision would determine whether the morning ended in restraint or in a collision that could ignite something far larger. So the question is no longer theoretical. Was this a necessary show of American resolve, or a gamble so dangerous that a single misstep could have pushed three nations toward an escalation no one could control? At 8:11 a.m., just when it seemed the standoff had settled into a fragile equilibrium, the impossible happened. Every radar display aboard the USS Kearney flickered once, then again, before freezing entirely. For 3 full seconds, the destroyer's combat systems were blind. Not jammed, not interfered with, but silenced in a way that suggested something far more sophisticated than ordinary electronic warfare. When the screens returned, a new contact had entered the battle space. A third submarine, not Venezuelan, not Russian, something entirely different. Its acoustic signature failed to match any vessel in the U.S. Navy's registry. It was not diesel-electric, not nuclear in the conventional sense, and not consistent with any known propulsion pattern. The noise profile was so faint, so unnaturally clean, that for the first time that morning, seasoned sonar operators hesitated. The closest match came from a classified intelligence file labeled Sino Classification Level Red, a designation reserved for experimental next-generation Chinese submarines rumored to be under development but never confirmed at sea. If true, Beijing had just inserted a covert platform directly into the heart of a Russian-Venezuelan standoff unfolding in America's backyard. And if that presence was not announced, not acknowledged, not coordinated with anyone above the waves, It meant China was observing and probing from a position of complete deniability. 8 minutes later, at 8:19 a.m., another shift occurred. The Venezuelan frigate that had been pressuring the Carney suddenly slowed and altered course, not because of any American maneuver, but because it had received an encrypted command. Analysts would later determine that the instruction originated from the mysterious submarine, bounced through a Venezuelan naval relay, and disguised as a routine operational message. This was not an accident. It was control. Someone underwater was directing the actions of a surface ship belonging to a sovereign nation. On board the Carney, the implications hit hard. A commander now faced a choice with no safe answer. Attempt to track the unidentified submarine and risk provoking China directly, or maintain formation and brace for the possibility that a tri-front standoff, Russia below, Venezuela ahead, China unseen, was materializing in real time. At 8:27 a.m., a classified alert reached the Carney. New threat vector detected. Possible cyber penetration attempt. Source unknown. This confirmed the earlier blackout had not been a glitch. It was a probe, a system test, possibly an attempt to map or infiltrate the destroyer's defensive architecture. If a cyber breach had succeeded even briefly, any U.S. ship in the region would be vulnerable. A destroyer could lose its shield. An aircraft carrier nearby could be exposed. The entire American power projection posture in the Caribbean could be compromised in seconds. What unfolded in those moments was no longer a regional confrontation. It was a preview of a nightmare scenario Pentagon planners had feared for years. Russia applying pressure through hard presence, Venezuela acting as host and conduit, and China inserting a silent shadow beneath the waves, each move overlapping just enough to stress the U.S. Navy from multiple angles without triggering a formal war. One question now dominated the minds of strategists, intelligence analysts, and commanders from Washington to Norfolk. Had the United States stumbled into the first coordinated Russia-China dual-theater pressure test of the modern era, one staged not in the Pacific but right inside America's own sphere of influence? By 9:11 a.m., the confrontation in the Caribbean had transformed from a regional flare-up into a quiet but unmistakable global shock. The USS Carney held its position with unwavering discipline, maintaining its line against a Russian submarine pair, a Venezuelan surface force, and, most unsettling, a silent foreign submarine whose acoustic signature whispered only one realistic conclusion: China had entered the board. Yet, despite the encirclement forming around it, not a single missile was fired, not a single hull made contact, and not one sailor crossed the threshold from tension into catastrophe. That outcome was not luck. It was discipline. It was restraint. It was the U.S. Navy demonstrating that power is measured not only in the weapons a ship carries, but in the calm required to prevent a spark from igniting a chain reaction no nation can control. When the Carney finally received the order to widen distance and reposition, it executed the maneuver with deliberate precision. The Venezuelan frigate shadowed the movement but did not re-engage. The Russian submarines held depth without advancing, and the unidentified vessel, the Phantom machine lurking in the deep, slipped quietly out of the battle space, leaving behind only the echo of unanswered questions. But the message it carried was unmistakable. America's backyard had not been probed by one adversary, but by two, each acting in ways that amplified the other's leverage without stating a single word in public. In the hours that followed, war simulation analysts began modeling scenarios no longer confined to theory. What if a confrontation like this occurred simultaneously with Pacific tension? What if a Chinese carrier group pressed U.S. positions near Guam at the exact moment Russian submarines operated freely near Puerto Cabello? What if a destroyer went blind for 3 seconds in the Caribbean while an aircraft carrier in the Pacific faced an incoming swarm? These questions were not abstract. They were warning signals that adversaries might already be exploring coordination, not through treaties or speeches, but through timing, pressure, and silence. Because strength does not exist to start wars. It exists to keep moments like this from spiraling into conflicts that redraw borders and ruin decades of stability. A single misjudgment, a collision at sea, a misread radar ping, an unanswered provocation could have lit a fuse stretching from the Caribbean to the Pacific. On this morning, the Carney did not flinch, did not escalate, and did not surrender presence in a region that has anchored American security doctrine for more than a century. That single choice prevented a crisis from becoming a conflagration. But it also revealed a harsher reality for the decade ahead. The United States must now contend with adversaries who test boundaries subtly, coordinate quietly, and apply pressure from multiple directions at once. Russia exploiting geographic proximity, China projecting silent reach, and Venezuela providing a stage where both can operate with plausible deniability. The Caribbean may have calmed by midday, but the world that morning revealed a new truth. Competition will no longer unfold in isolated theaters. Pressure will stack, tension will overlap. And the next test may not offer the luxury of warning or the mercy of a 3-second blackout that ends without consequence. So the question now falls to us. Does this morning prove that American strength still deters chaos? Or does the emerging alignment of Russia, China, and Venezuela signal a future where the United States must prepare for pressure from every direction at once? If you believe strength prevents war, subscribe and stay with us. And if you sense the world shifting beneath our feet, tell us why. History is unfolding in real time, and none of us can afford to look away.